African right here. Sahori, who was on the stolen legacy of Dr. George G.M. James' book when it first came out, who brought to the world's first navy. This Grandmaster over 4,000 years ago in the 5th dynastic period. Nose and lips intact. How about this African Grandmaster, Pepe II? See over here. And he is the one that said that heaven was between the legs of the goddess Nut. That Dr. Ben rephrased it and said heaven is between the legs of the African woman. Where do we all come from? Right there in that micro universe. This African right here, Mentuhotep, 11th dynastic period. He was a Semitawi. This black man. As I said, we have thin nose, wide nose, thick lips, and thin lips. No one prototype that defines an African facial characteristic. But he also had to fight the sand dwellers that were coming in during this time over 4,000 years ago. He was a Wasetian that came up from the south. We always came up from the south. South Chicago, South Central LA, South Philly, South Kemet, Tasseti, 26,000 years, always from the south. We might be on the south side of Oakland. I don't know where we are right now, but we might be there right now. The African right here, Amenemhet, these are the Grandmasters they don't want you to know about. No plausible evidence exists. Yes. 12th dynastic period, Amenemhet, 1997 BC. Last time there was a 1997 prior to the one in the AD was this time period. This is where we were at. This African right here, where he brought to the world Amen. Where we still worship Amen at the end of our prayers, that he has Amen in the beginning of his name, Amenemhet the first. Yes, sir. How about this African right here, Sinroret, who set up the kingdom of Athens, even took an army to the southern part of Russia called Black Georgia today, that Martin Brunell, the European, in his book Black Athenia talks about, that they even came down on him for giving the black evidence to it. We see another African in the 12th dynastic period. Is his capstone that you've been looking at that got Orion on it, that I showed you in the Cairo Museum. He is the one also who had to fight the sand dwellers, and it's after this period that a full-scale invasion came into Kemet. This is Nima Atra, Amenemhet III. This Wasetian, his nose had been slashed out as well. It was the Hyksos who came in and enslaved the Kemetic people for 200 years that Josephus talks about, who came in, Josephus, who lived around 32 to 100 AD. Said that these people came in and enslaved us, that I deal with in my lecture, African History versus Biblical Myths, extensively. Until the second Enrei Tao II came up from the south, from Waset, and lost his life on the battlefield. Until his son, Atmos I, opened up the 18th dynasty called the Golden Age and expelled these people out of our land. This is the only exodus that ever took place, where they took from this African, Atmos, a real person, and made a Moses. And I document that as thoroughly as I document this. I had to go all the way to England to take this picture, this grand, serious soldier, warrior, Men Kemerata Houthi. He had 17 battles and won them all. He kicked butt. He wanted to make sure those Hyksos weren't going to come back into our land. When I was in England, some white woman was standing there and said, "Oh, the Egyptians are white." I ran up there and measured the lips. I said, "One of y'all come up here and have a lip measurement going on here." But I had to go all the way to England to take this Grandmaster. But yet this Grandmaster, Amenhotep, the son of Hapu. But yet we still talking about Hiram Abip. How about Amenhotep, the son of Hapu? A Grandmaster also long before some Hiram Abip. He also built for his Grandmaster King, Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III, as we see him right here, is he's called our dazzling son. I mean, in Kemet magazine, they said, well, the reason the lips look like this is because they wanted a more stylized version. I mean, these are psychopathic racists trying to preserve white supremacy. But we're putting a serious crack in it for it to fall down. Yes. Another Grandmaster, Ursama Atlas Tepen Ra, or Mr. Murray that I've been saying. This was the Grandmaster that built an Abu symbol, the Temple of Eternity. As I'll break his middle letter name down, Ursa, Ma'at Ra, Septepen Ra, Ra Mesu Murray Amen. Don't that sound good? Yes. I know you haven't heard it in a long time. Yes. Let's translate it. Ursa, the power of truth, justice, and righteousness under God. Septepen Ra means chosen by God. They took chosen by God right out of Septepen Ra's name. This is where God's chosen children came from. We are the first people who were chosen to walk the face of the earth first. We say, oh, that's God's chosen children. We can't talk about them now. God get mad at us. Ramesu, loved by Ra. Murray Amen. He was loved by Amen. This is the Grandmaster during his time, brothers and sisters, in the Shanu of his royal name. This Grandmaster Taharqa, he also was a Grandmaster who had to come up from the south to free Kemet from the barbarians. He was a Semitawi. And then the first one to open up the 25th dynasty was Kashata. Then it went into Ka'anki and Shabaka, and then we also see Taharqa. These were the great Tanihisians that go all the way back. In fact, they are the mothers of dynastic Egypt. This is where the initiation took place. 40 years. You had to master your thoughts. Every thought that came up in your head, you brought that thought to your mind. You had to control many different spiritual sides and also master your passion and so forth to become the Kariheb high priest. In fact, we see this is where 80,000 students at one time went to school here. We brought to the world the first universities, Eperasut and the city of Waset. This is where the kings came up from the south to defeat the barbarians that came into our land. This is where the baptism took place long before John the Baptist. Here you became baptized to become one with Asar, to sit on the square as he overlooked the lake that represented spiritual consciousness, become one with Asar. In fact, they also mastered the pi, mathematics. Here you see the Europeans came in and robbed mathematical papyruses and so forth and put their names on it. Like the Rhine mathematical papyrus, put their name on it. But Pythagoras got his Pythagorean theorem right from Africa, but yet now they're going to say Egyptian sailmakers construct a Pythagorean triangle? There's no Pythagorean triangle. Even the Freemasonry Encyclopedia says this symbol was received by Pythagoras from the Egyptians during his long sojourn in that country, and with it he also learned the peculiar property it possessed, namely that the sum of the squares and the two shorter sides is equal to the squares of the longest side, symbolically expressed by the formula, that product of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, or Sar, Aset, and Haru. This figure has been adopted in the third degree of Freemasonry. Dr. Ben, in his book, The Mystery System, Dr. Ben said the African-Egyptian theorem was used by Pythagoras, which for centuries just carried his name. The Pythagorean theorem was based off of Asar's resurrection to the living perpendicular. That's what it was based off of. This is the theorem when it goes back to Asar's spiritual resurrection of the African spiritual mystery system. It had nothing to do with no Pythagoras. And now Negro Masons got the Knights of Pythagoras. When are they going to have the Knights of Enhotep? When are they going to have the Knights of Ursa Ma'at Ras of Tep and Ra? When are they going to have the Knights of Liberation of African People Order?